present For the Record.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Naomi Collins. In a story that never ends, we continue to see individuals level fresh claims of fraud in Wisconsin's 2020 election, despite court rulings, recounts, certifications, audits, and reviews finding no evidence of widespread fraud. Nearly 2 weeks ago, a convicted felon conducting his own review claimed to the legislature that he had found more than 1 million examples of fraud in Wisconsin. But in a hearing this week, Wisconsin's chief elections official, Megan Wolf, and the Wisconsin Elections Commission technology director, Rob Kehoe, spent 2 hours refuting those claims. Both of them sit down with me to discuss. Robert, what would it take to steal an election in Wisconsin?
Well, stealing an election, of course, is no small thing. And as I discussed with the Committee for Elections and Campaigns before the Assembly Committee, there are more than 20 steps that would be required to insert just one artificial ballot into the system. There are thousands upon thousands of people that work in elections at all levels, from local government up to the state level, and every one of them has a hand in the process, and every one of them has an opportunity to identify and stop anything that appears amiss. And so, the suggestion that someone could easily insert one or more artificial ballots into the system is not something we would take lightly.
Which is something that the Wisconsin Elections Commission has been spending the last almost 2 years refuting at some level.
Yeah, I think that's right. Certainly we take every claim that comes to our office seriously. We think that if there is credible evidence, those are things we look into, those are things that we investigate. What we really caution people from, though, is jumping to any kind of conclusion before you have the information, before you have the facts. Don't allow an unsubstantiated claim to take off like wildfire. We will look into those, we investigate them, and we usually there's an answer for these things, but they do require more context about how elections work.
This week before Legislative Committee, Robert, you kind of went step by step and refuted quite a number of claims that were presented in this previous committee a couple weeks ago. Talk me through the time and the process it takes for you and your team to go through step by step and take an individual claim like that and then, refute it.
Certainly. And, we take every claim or question that we receive very seriously, because some of the allegations that are being made are very alarming. They are very serious. And if I were a voter not working in elections and heard some of these things, they would be disturbing to me. And I would hope that election officials take them seriously. So whenever we receive any kind of claim or question, there's usually a number of staff at the agency who would be involved in resolving that question, determining what happened. Sometimes it requires us to reach out to local officials, because in Wisconsin, the local officials at the municipal level are the ones that run elections, and sometimes we have to reach out to them for their records and ask them what happened. But ultimately, each and every claim we receive, we do run to ground, and there are on occasions things that are concerning and require referral to law enforcement, but those are the exception and not the rule.
What is either being delayed or not done at the agency when all this time and resources is being spent refuting misinformation?
It's a good question, and I think that typically in a year like 2021, what we're doing is we're taking a look at what worked well, what needs improvements, how can we make sure that we're continuing to provide even better service to our local election officials whom we support, and to voters in terms of providing them with information. Things like our myvote.wi.gov website. We'd be looking at, does everything work for people how they expect, or are there changes we need to make? We've had to back burner, I think, a lot of those improvements, innovations that happen usually in an odd number year, and a lot of our attention has been instead focused on answering questions, and many of them, we don't mind the answering question part, that's fine. It's when there's an unsubstantiated rumor that has already caught fire, and then we have to spend our time chasing that down or helping to put out that fire. I think that's where a lot of our time is spent right now, and again, we hope that people will ask us questions before they start making conclusions.
What is the long-term impacts of some of those changes and upgrades and improvements you mentioned being delayed because 2021 was spent as it was?
Well, we're still going to continue to have secure, accurate elections that we administer and the local election officials administer with integrity. But I think that as election officials, we always want to keep making improvements in delivering an even better experience and service to all the voters across the state. And so we haven't had as much time to make some of those improvements we may have liked to, but that's not to say that there's necessarily a consequence on future elections. It just means that we haven't maybe been able to focus as much time on making some of those improvements as we'd like.
Before we shift gears, I want to ask you briefly about some of your, not personal, but professional history. You spent more than 20 years in the Army. You mentioned earlier that you spent time actually helping put Iraq's elections in place. Whether it's a comparison or a contrast or some kind of parallel, I would love to kind of get your perspective of that experience versus what everything has been like since the 2020 general election.
Well, that is certainly a challenging question, and I'm not sure I can do it justice. I would say that you know, my experiences working on Iraq's first and second ever democratic elections was, of course, a remarkable one. And one of the things that really struck me about the experience was just how appreciative everyone there was the opportunity to participate in the process. So I got to see firsthand you know, what it's like for someone who has never had the opportunity to express themselves in government, you know, get that chance for the first time, and it certainly left an impression on me. You know, I think all of us who are fortunate enough to have been born and raised in the United States, all of us, myself included, are sometimes, you know, guilty of taking that that wonderful right for granted. And so, you know, I think I certainly came back with an appreciation of the process and the opportunity.
When we come back, has Megan Wolf interviewed yet for Michael Gableman's investigation? We'll ask. For the record, as we continue our conversation with the Wisconsin Election Commission's Megan Wolf and Robert Kehoe. Shifting gears a bit, Megan, the courts ruled in January that they, for now, are not blocking subpoenas from Michael Gableman, the Assembly's ongoing investigation, to, you know, prevent you from interviewing in private, in secret, with Gableman. Since that court ruling, have you interviewed with him? Has there been contact between you and anyone on his staff?
Well, DOJ continues to pursue, you know, our strong desire to have those meetings held in public. Every aspect of elections, when you think about it, every single aspect demands that elections be transparent, that they be bipartisan, and that they be done by professionals. And so I think that what we're looking for is the same type of transparency as part of any review of elections. The review of elections is a natural part of elections as well, but that any review be held transparently, just like every other aspect of elections.
So to confirm, no interviews yet with Gableman?
That's correct.
There have been a lot of calls from lawmakers dating back now a few months for your resignation, often for decisions that you've pointed out the commissioners made during the 2020 election. Have commissioners ever privately talked to you about resigning, on whichever party they were from? No, the commission has largely, I think, been supportive, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of how our agency operates. I think that people don't understand that the commission makes bipartisan decisions. We have 6 commissioners evenly split between Republicans and Democrats, and every time a decision is made, it requires 4 of their votes. So every decision is a bipartisan decision. I am the nonpartisan administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission, and my job is to implement their directives. And so I do think a lot of what is happening is really just a misunderstanding of how our agency operates. Your comments about nonpartisan versus bipartisan are interesting and actually a great segue for my next question. I've seen a number of these hearings where you sit in front of the elections committee, you answer questions for hours on end. A lot of these questions are often, sometimes, at times, either subjective or they're combative or they're political in nature. What's going through your mind? Because again, as a nonpartisan official, a lot of these questions are simply ones you either can't answer or it's just not the nature of questions you answer. How do you answer those? What's going through your mind?
Yeah, that's a great question too, because I've had the great experience of getting to do elections for the last 10 years. And how I see it is I'm never there to talk about the merits of a law. From my perspective, there aren't good laws or bad laws. There are just laws that we have to implement. There's just directives of the commission that I have to implement. And so my job is really just to show people how it works, to sort of lift the hood and show people how election administration works. And so that's what I'm thinking about when I'm talking to the legislature, when I'm talking to my bipartisan commission, is making sure that they know how the process works, making sure the public knows how the process works so they can use that information to make informed decisions.
I think my next question might be one that technically you might want to answer as well as on a policy level, but there's a lot of buzzwords that are going around in the last 18 months. And one of them, the newest phrase, I'm going to read it to make sure I get it correctly. When people say they want a, quote, independent, full, forensic, physical cyber audit of a future election, what does that mean in actual election terms? Does that mean anything, technically or otherwise?
So that is not a term that exists in statute. That is not a term that exists as sort of a term of art in election administration. What we do have in elections is some statutory terms that do mean a review of the election. So we have canvass. That's where the municipality, the county, and then the state review the results of an election to make sure that everything makes sense before the election is certified. We have recount. That happened after the 2020 election in our two largest counties, where the election is reviewed and recounted to verify it. And we do have audits that are a statutory term, and that applies to our post-election voting equipment audits, which happened after 2020, just like it does other general elections, where the voting equipment is actually reviewed and the totals are compared against the totals on the paper ballots. So there are terms that do mean a review of an election, but that term is not something that exists in the election or the statutory vocabulary.
From a data and technological perspective, when you hear people calling for a forensic audit, a cyber audit, I'm confused when I hear these terms. I don't know what that means. What are you thinking when you hear them?
Well, I think the term forensic audit or cyber audit is borrowed from the cybersecurity industry, which in turn borrowed the concept of forensics from law enforcement. And so in the cybersecurity world, forensic analysis typically refers to the work that's performed after a cybersecurity breach of some kind, where experts are trying to trace the data and determine what happened. As it's applied to elections, as Megan said, it's not really a term of art in the elections sphere, and so I'd have to defer to the folks who are using that term and ask them what it means.
Fair enough. Any questions that you wished I would have asked? Anything that you want to add to this conversation for either of you?
I think that if people are seeking answers or information about elections, to talk to your local election official. They really are a rich source of knowledge on election administration. Wisconsin has the most decentralized election administration system in the country, and what that means is in each city, town, and village, you have an election official. So this is somebody that's probably your neighbor, your friend, your family, that is running elections in your community. And so if you have questions, there's so many opportunities to get involved, to watch any aspect of the election process, to be a poll worker, talk to your clerk, and I would just really encourage people to get involved in elections in your community and actually see how it works.
Thanks so much, both of you, for coming out and taking your time. After the break, a look at the last decade in Madison's housing market.